The first time I saw that thing, the lights were only on for a second. That was long enough for me to see something standing outside my bedroom window, and long enough to realize it had been standing there before the power went out. Let me tell you the whole story. My name is Vyat Kolpi. Last October, I rented a hunting cabin deep in the Appalachian foothills of West Virginia. It sat at the end of a heavily rutted logging road, miles from the nearest highway and well past where cell service dropped off. I am an architectural drafter. I had a massive deadline approaching and desperately needed zero distractions, no texts, no neighbors, just me, my laptop, and a coffee maker. The cabin was cheap because it offered nothing but a wood stove, baseboard heaters, and a roof. It was exactly what I wanted. The first 2 days were productive. I worked 14 hours straight, ate canned soup, and slept like a rock. The Appalachian woods in autumn have a sharp smell, and the lack of light pollution meant the night was vast and pitch dark. By the third night, the isolation stopped feeling peaceful. It felt like a trap. I woke up suddenly, my eyes snapping open to total blackness. The first thing I noticed was the cold. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand and checked the screen. 3 a.m. exactly. The battery icon was not showing the charging bolt. I tapped the bedside lamp. Nothing. That's when I realized the power was out. I assumed it was a blown breaker or a branch down on the power lines. That happens constantly out there. I debated leaving it until morning, but the temperature was dropping fast. Mid October in West Virginia gets freezing at night, and without heat, the cabin was becoming an icebox. I figured I should at least check the panel. I swung my legs out of bed. The floorboards were freezing. Using my phone screen for a weak glow, I stepped into the hallway. The layout was simple. The short hall opened into a living area with a kitchenette on the left and a large picture window facing the woods on the right. I shined my phone toward the electrical panel on the wall and flipped the cover open. Every single breaker was sitting securely in the on position. None of them had tripped. The lines are down, I thought. Nothing I can do until sunrise. I pushed the panel shut. The metallic snap echoed through the empty cabin. Then something outside made a sound. 3 slow knocks. I froze. The sound had come from the direction of the picture window. I stood there listening. Nothing. I told myself it was a branch, except there were no trees close enough to the cabin for a branch to hit that window. I slowly turned around, sweeping my phone light across the dark living room. The wheat beam caught the edge of the large picture window. Outside, the woods were an imprintable wall of black. There was no moon, no stars, just heavy darkness pressing up against the glass. I stopped in the middle of the room, and then the power surged. It was not a full restoration. The overhead lights flared with a harsh buzzing hum, casting a blinding yellow light over everything for maybe a second and a half before snapping back to complete blackness. But that second and a half was enough. The woods outside the window were illuminated, and there was a shape standing right on the other side of the glass. It was not a bear. It was not a deer. It was not anything I could identify. It was a figure, horrifyingly tall. Its head reached the very top of the window frame, easily 7 feet above the porch deck. It was impossibly thin, wrapped in something dark and ragged that looked heavy, like wet cloth. But the worst part was its arms. They hung far too low. The fingertips almost reached its knees. Its head was tilted slightly to one side, as if it were trying to understand what I was. And where its face should have been, there was nothing. No eyes, no mouth, just a flat black shape. But somehow I knew it was looking directly at me. Then I noticed something else. The porch boards were wet from the previous night's rain. I could see them clearly in that brief flash of light. There was no footprints. None. The thing was standing on the porch, but the wet boards beneath it were completely untouched. Where the darkness slammed back down, the bright yellow after image burned behind my eyelids. I stumbled backward, my bare heel catching on a rug. My heart hammered so violently against my ribs that my chest ached. I hit the edge of the kitchen counter and gripped it, staring blindly toward the window. "Hello?" My voice cracked. It sounded pathetic and small. No answer. Then I heard something. A slow scrap. Not from the window, from the porch. Something dragging one foot across the wooden boards. I held my breath. Scrap. Pause. Scrap. Pause. It stopped directly in front of the window. I couldn't see anything, but I knew where it was. I brought my phone up, my hand shaking so badly I almost dropped it, and aimed a screen toward the window. The glare reflected off the glass, making it impossible to see the porch. But I didn't need to. Have you ever been in a dark room with someone, and even though you can't see them, you can feel the physical weight of their presence? You can feel the air displaced, the heavy focus directed right at you. That's what this was. I was blind, but I knew with absolute certainty that whatever had been illuminated had not moved an inch. It was still standing on the other side of the glass, separately from me by a quarter inch of cheap material. Then the window creaked, just once. A soft, slow groan from the frame. I stared at it. Another sound came from outside. This time it sounded like breathing. Deep, slow, wet. I couldn't run. The front door was next to the window. The back door led to dense brush where I would be blind. My car was 30 feet away in the driveway, right in its line of sight. If I went outside, I was stepping into its territory. I was trapped. I stood frozen against the counter for what felt like hours, though it was probably minutes. My eyes strained against the dark until my temples dropped. The breathing continued. Slow inhale, long pause, slow exhale. I realized something that made my stomach turn. The sound was not coming from the porch, it was coming from the glass. I took one step backward. The breathing stopped. Complete silence. I waited. Nothing. I took another step. The breathing starting again. This time it was closer. I clamped my mouth tightly shut and held my breath, listening for a footstep on the porch boards or a scratch at the siding. Total suffocating silence. Then a faint sound came from the window. A soft tap. Not three knocks this time, just one, right at eye level. I didn't move. Another tap, then another. Slow, patient, as if something on the other side knew exactly where I was standing. I took a slow step closer to the window, lowering my phone to my chest so the glare wouldn't blind me. I needed to see if it was still there. I stopped 3 feet from the glass. The heavy cloud cover outside must have broken slightly, because moonlight had started filtering faintly through the canopy, casting a dull grey, luminous scene over the room. It was not enough to see the porch outside, but it was enough to see the surface of the window pane itself, because the cabin was getting so cold and the air outside was freezing. A thick layer of condensation had formed on the inside of the glass. The entire pan was frosted over. As I stood there in the dark, holding my breath so tightly my lungs burned, I watched the condensation in the center of the window. It cleared in a small, perfect circle. The moisture vanished. I could see the solid blackness outside. 2 seconds later, the circle clouded over again with fresh grey fog. Then it cleared. Then it fogged in and out. A slow, rhythmic expansion and contraction of moisture on the inside of the glass. It perfectly matched the rhythm of breathing, deep, heavy breathing. But I was not breathing. My mouth was shut as tight as a vice. I was not projecting any air at all. I stared at that pulsing circle of fog, struggling to process it. Then something moved inside the circle. Not outside, inside the reflection. I saw a tall shape behind me. I spun around. Nothing. The room was empty. I slowly looked back at the window. The condensation was still pulsing. Clear clear cloud. But now there was another detail. At the bottom of the window, 5 long streaks had appeared in the condensation. They looked like fingerprints, except they were on the inside. I stepped backward. My stomach dropped. The thing outside couldn't have touched the inside of the glass, unless it was not outside anymore. I backed away, inch by inch, never taking my eyes off that patch of glass. The fog pulsed. Then the 5 streaks slowly moved upward, not quickly, not violently. They simply slid up the inside of the glass as if an invisible hand were dragging its finger toward the top. I turned and ran. I didn't care about making noise anymore. I reached the bedroom, slammed the door behind me, locked the flimsy latch, dragged the heavy oak dresser across the floor, and wedged it firmly under the knob. Then I sat in the farthest corner, back pressed against the wall, knees to my chest, clutching my dead phone. For several minutes, nothing happened. Then I heard the living room floorboard creak. Once, then another. Slow footsteps, not outside, inside the cabin. I stared at the bedroom door. The footsteps stopped directly outside. I waited for the doorknob to turn. It didn't. Instead, something breathed on the other side. Deep and slow. I covered my mouth with both hands. The breathing continued for almost a minute. Then it stopped. I stayed there until the sun broke over the Appalachian ridges, painting the sky outside a pale purple. I never heard the bedroom door move. I never heard the dresser shake, and I never heard the thing leave. As soon as there was enough light to clearly see my surroundings, I pushed the dresser aside, unlocked the door, and bolted. I didn't pack my laptop or my clothes. I ran straight through the living room, keeping my eyes fixed on the front door, terrified to glance at the picture window. I threw the deadbolt open, sprinted barefoot to my car, and drove down that rutted logging road like a madman. I didn't stop until I hit the gas station 2 towns over and brought a coffee just to sit among normal working people. I called the property owner later that afternoon and told him a severe emergency came up. I paid him extra to box up my electronics and clothes and ship them back. I never went back to those woods. Over the next few weeks, I aggressively rationalized the whole thing. I told myself it was just a trick of the light, a weird thermal draft in the cabin causing the condensation to shift. The mind playing terrifying tricks on an isolated guy in the dead of the night. I almost fully convinced myself too. Then 3 weeks later, I was back in my secure second-story apartment in the city. It was raining heavily, a miserable November downpour. I was sitting alone at my kitchen table, working late. Without warning, the overhead lights flared with a harsh buzz. They snapped completely off, then came back on. Just a momentary flicker, a blown transformer down the block, probably. I actually laughed. I remember thinking how stupid I had been. My apartment was completely empty. The deadbolt on the front door was securely locked. The windows were shut. There was nowhere for anyone to stand outside. I looked toward the window facing the fire escape. A small, perfect circle of condensation had formed on the inside of the glass. I stopped breathing. The circle slowly cleared, then fogged over. Cleared, fogged, the exact same rhythm. I stood up slowly. The room suddenly felt much colder. I walked toward the window. The mist continued to pulse. Then another circle appeared beside it, smaller, then another, and another. 4 circles in total. I stared at them, unable to move. They were not random patches of condensation. They were spaced apart, at different heights, like something was standing on the other side of the glass. Something tall, something breathing. Then the lowest circle disappeared. A second later, the one above it disappeared. Then the next. The mist was moving upward. I backed away. The final circle disappeared. For several seconds, the window was completely clear. Then 5 long streaks slowly appeared across the inside of the glass, one after another, like fingers dragging themselves downward. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. And then, in the center of the window, a small circle of grey mist appeared again. It expanded, slowly, steadily, like something on the other side of the glass was taking one long breath. Then it vanished, and from the darkness outside my second-story window, something tapped once against the glass. No, I never looked outside.